What's up, Warhams? I did it. I found what I think is the weirdest Easter egg in all of Warhammer 40,000. Warhammer was created by a bunch of history nerds, hence this gigantic war machine being inspired by a short story by Fyodor Dostoevsky, or this psychopath who was inspired by writer Joseph Conrad. What if I told you there was an alien faction in Warhammer 40,000 that was inspired by a comedic novella written by a mathematician? In the book Xenology, we're introduced to the Umbra. The Umbra are a mysterious species that appear to us as giant floating black orbs. They can't communicate, but when threatened, they can turn the darkness itself into weapons. Blades, teeth, hooks, anything. The word Umbra is Latin for shadow. In astronomy, it usually refers to a sunspot or the shadow cast by an eclipse. They're mostly peaceful, but do not cross them. They will tear you apart. They appear most often in ships that have just transferred through the warp. Now, no one is quite sure what the Umbra are, but the evidence points to it being the remains of one of the old ones who was killed by the coming of Slaanesh. Xenology is an amazing book. It's sort of a hand guide for different kinds of Xenos that exist in the Warhammer universe. But what struck me is this passage right here. Consider a being that exists solely within two dimensions. It has no sense of depth, and to its eye, should it have one, any object bisecting its shallow plane must appear as a straight line of infinitely narrow width. To such a being, a human must seem a very curious thing. A straight line that expands and contracts as its body passes across its view. That passage right there is when I realized it. The Umbra, the entire species, are a reference to an obscure comedy novella from the 19th century called Flatland. It was written by this guy, Edwin Abbott. I didn't stutter, that was his name. He was an Anglican priest and a headmaster, a teacher, and a mathematician. Now, Flatland is written by A. Square, which is a pseudonym for Edwin Abbott. And it's about a square, a literal square, and I'm using the word literal correctly here, that lives on a two-dimensional plane. It sees everything else around it as straight lines because it can't see in three dimensions. But as the story goes on, it is eventually introduced to a floating sphere. So just like Warhammer took Fyodor Dostoevsky and turned him into a giant murder mecha, also they're taking Edwin Abbott's work and turning it into if a black floating basketball was Pinhead from Hellraiser. God, I fucking love Warhammer 40,000.